American democracy is being transformed. The old politics was defined by the stump speech and the fundraising dinner. The new politics features viral video and internet donations. The old politics was reported by the mainstream media. The new politics is defined by blogs and user-generated content. An exaggeration? Well, my guest today has created one of the most successful political websites in the US. Will this year's presidential election be won and lost on the internet? Arianna Huffington, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you.
Has the internet really changed the face of American politics, do you think?
It has. If it were not for the internet, Barack Obama would not be the Democratic nominee. First of all, he used the internet masterfully. He used the internet to raise money, to organize, to keep his supporters engaged, and to spread the word. You know, his speech on race has been seen by millions of people on YouTube. He has his 1 millionth friend on Facebook as of this week. And he has now opted out of the public financing system because he trusts that he can raise almost unlimited quantities of money, not from big donors and lobbyists, but from ordinary Americans.
And I recall hearing very similar comments in 2003 when Democrat Howard Dean launched his bid for the Democratic nomination on the internet and quickly signed up hundreds of thousands of supporters. So what is really different?
What is different is that Obama has been able to make the transition between what's happening on the internet, what's happening in the digital space, and what's happening on the street. He, for example, took his Facebook supporters and turned them from a social network to real people knocking on real doors in Ohio. That was a transition which Howard Dean failed to make, and Obama made brilliantly.
Well, you talk about young people, and I know from my own household that young people are tuning in. My own daughter, for example, she looks online at the Obama, I've got a crush on Obama video on YouTube. She looks at bizarre sites like Pets for Obama, which dogs and cats are seen mouthing support for the Democratic nominee. This is funny, but it isn't going to sway people's vote in November, is it?
No, but other parts are swaying people's votes for November. I mean, my own daughter turned of age in this election, so she voted for the first time at 18 for Obama. And she's been following the campaign avidly. And what she sees among her friends is the fact that for the first time, they're actually believing that politics can change what's happening in America. Remember, there's been tremendous disillusionment over the past 7.5 years. You know, the Bush administration's policies, you know, in Iraq, domestically, have made many people feel that politics is so broken that there's no point in engaging in it again. And that's really what the Obama campaign has succeeded in changing.
Well, we'll talk about the issues in a minute, but just to stick with this for just a moment longer, to hear you talk and to hear your explanation of how young people are being energized, how grassroots activists are being mobilized by Obama's internet campaign, you would think that Barack Obama ought to be 30 points ahead in the polls. I mean, the fact is, the latest polls suggest he's only 6 points ahead. So whatever Obama's advantage on the web, it isn't translating into nationwide support.
That's a very important point. It's what I call the 28-48% disconnect. George Bush's approval rating is down to 28%, but 48% are saying they will vote for John McCain. And that is really the key to the November election. If Obama does not succeed in convincing the American people that the John McCain they want to vote for is not on the ballot in 2008, he's the John McCain of 2000, then he will be in trouble. And part of the equation has to do with the American media. You see, the American media, myself included, fell in love with John McCain in 2000. He was an exceptional leader, a real reformer. The Straight Talk Express, remember, was going around America, but he has surrendered all his principles to the right.
Well, let's talk about this in some detail, because I remember I covered that campaign, the McCain-Bush primary, a very nasty primary, in 2000. And I remember watching McCain on platforms with you. I remember one particular one in California. You say now, I was in love with the man. The fact is, you admired his stands on key issues, and the John McCain of today has many of the same principles and the same stands.
No, just let's take the key issues of our time. On the economy, he said that he could not, in good conscience, these were his words, vote for George Bush's tax cuts at a time of war. Now he wants to make them permanent.
No, but hang on, we're not talking about positions he took during the Bush administration. We're talking about the John McCain that you supported in '99 and 2000. He was a fiscal conservative. He believed in cutting taxes and slashing government spending. Look at McCain's program today. He believes in cutting taxes and slashing government spending. You accuse him of flip-flopping, of losing his principles. He's the same man.
No. The key to McCain in 2000 was his reformer zeal. That reformer zeal is gone. His campaign is filled with lobbyists. His positions on key issues like immigration. Remember, he has now said he would not even be voting for his own bill. His position on torture, that for me was the ultimate surrender. You know, this is this war hero who has tortured himself, who voted against the bill that would ban the CIA from using torture. And his position on Iraq, of course, is utterly delusional. You know, this is a man who still thinks we are winning in Iraq and wants to keep the troops there indefinitely.
You have a deep personal bitterness about John McCain. That's fair, isn't it? You say you loved the man before, now you sound as though you despise him.
I can assure you there is nothing personal about it. I'm just very saddened by the fact that a real leader has fallen. You know, I'm not saddened that Mitt Romney is flip-flopping. You know, Mitt Romney is an ordinary Paul. You know, they flip-flop all the time. But with John McCain, his fall is Shakespearean, which means that he was a noble man. And now he's become basically another pandering pawn of the right.
Nothing personal, you say, and yet you took a very personal decision. You decided to release to the press, through your own website, private, confidential information, conversation that you'd had with John McCain at a private dinner party after the 2000 election.
Yes, that was a hard decision. That was, yes, that was personal, but not personal bitterness or any personal emotions.
Well, it was hardly about personal admiration, was it? You caused John McCain a great deal of political trouble, all based on a private, confidential conversation.
That was a conversation, in case your viewers don't know about it, during a dinner before the inauguration in 2001, when John McCain, in the presence of a group of friends, talked about how he did not vote for George Bush in 2000 and how dangerous George Bush was for the country. And the reason why I decided after 7.5 years to write about it is because I hoped the media would understand why we loved John McCain in 2000. This is a man who abhorred George Bush so much he couldn't even vote for him, and how different the John McCain of 2008 is.
How would you feel if somebody dredged up some deeply confidential and private comment you'd made to them as a friend many years before? A statement that you couldn't verify as being true or false one way or the other. How would you feel about that?
Well, there were a lot of people present, and this was not something that John McCain just told us at that dinner. That was something he had told a lot of people.
But John McCain denies its truth. He says that it's not true that he didn't vote for George Bush.
Which is another indication of how different the John McCain of today is, how the truth doesn't really mean anything to him anymore. Well, there are other people at the dinner.
If I may, that's your view. It may be that John McCain was showing off at that dinner party. He knew he was surrounded by people who were no great friends and admirers of George Bush. He decided to impress you by saying he hadn't voted for Bush. You don't know whether it's true or not. The fact is, it was private.
How would you feel if somebody lied about who they voted for, one way or another, either lying there or lying now? Would you think that's a quality of leadership?
But the point is, this wasn't in the public domain. I put it to you, in your long career at the social apex of Washington. As a socialite who was identified with the Republican Party, now identified with liberal causes, you've probably said many things in private that were indiscreet, that you might now regard as deeply embarrassing.
Look at what is at stake right now. If John McCain wins, this would be a real tragedy for America that we cannot afford. America cannot afford another 4 years of George Bush. If there is anything I can do, anything at all, in telling the truth, to make this less likely, I will do it.
We don't know what the truth is.
I
we know what your version
is.
of the truth is, but what you've
It's
just said is fascinating.
You know what,
is that the guiding force behind the Huffington Post, the very, very influential website that you have created? No, not so much the telling the truth, doing whatever I can to ensure that the Republicans, and John McCain in particular, do not gain the White House. Is that your...
Provided it's based on truth and fact. We are not partisans in the sense that we would cover up for the people we prefer or say anything that is not true for the people we oppose. And we proved that when we posted Mayhill Fowler's, one of our citizen journalists, Barack Obama remarks during a San Francisco fundraiser, which were negative about Obama.
Let's get into this one, and this is important too. Ms. Fowler was an activist for Barack Obama. She was invited to an activist meeting in California. She was a donor to Obama's campaign. It was a meeting that was off-limits to the media.
No, it was not. It was not off the record. I'm sorry,
I didn't say that. I said it was off-limits to the media. The media was specifically excluded from the meeting. She went as an activist, nothing else. She heard things during that meeting that she thought were rather shocking, and after some deliberation, she blogged about it on the Huffington Post. Do you have any ethical issues with what she did?
No, and neither does the Barack Obama campaign. Obama's press secretary said that she had the right to do that, that the meeting was on the record. There were many people there with video cameras, and she had her recorder there. This is the new world of American politics, and I'm sure it's not going to be very different in England, which means that unless it's a definitely off-the-record conversation, there are people everywhere with recording equipment taking things down. And our citizen journalism project that we are calling Off the Bus has such a citizen journalists all across the country.
What on earth is a citizen journalist? She wasn't a journalist. She was simply, in that case, a witness. She was actually a political activist. Why call her a citizen journalist? It implies a sort of a professionalism and a neutrality that was never there.
I don't know who you are talking about, because the truth is that many professional, neutral journalists were responsible for enabling the administration to sell the war to the American people. What happened to them? Do you consider Judy Miller an ethical, responsible, professional journalist?
Judith Miller, we should say, of the New York Times, who wrote many articles in the run-up to the war about weapons of mass destruction.
Which turned out to be complete distortions of the truth, which were published above the fold in the paper of record. Was she a professional journalist? Was Michael Gordon, who was her co-writer, a professional journalist? It's time for those in the mainstream media to get off their high horse and look at the damage they have done to America, to the world, by simply allowing administration officials to pass anything, any propaganda to them through anonymous sources and print it without having any regard for the public interest.
So you're saying the public should take no more seriously, give no more weight to reporters who write in the New York Times, or I suppose one could assume even the BBC, than blog on your partisan website. Is that what you're saying?
We're deliberately not partisan. I made that very clear.
Forgive me, but you did just say that you would do anything in your power to see John McCain robbed of the White House.
Based on facts and evidence, and that is the key that I would really like you to listen to, because there is nothing that you can point to on the Huffington Post that I wrote or that Mayhill Fowler wrote that was not based on facts and evidence. And there is plenty that I can show you in the New York Times or the Washington Post in the lead up to the war, or even in the coverage of the war now, for example, that was based on nothing but anonymous sources and distortions.
Well, let's get it straight. There's no doubt that you do make mistakes on the Huffington Post website. You carried a blog purportedly from George Clooney once. It wasn't from George Clooney at all, and he called it purposefully misleading. So it's not as though you're whiter than white.
No. First of all, let me just say very clearly that we have very clear guidelines when we make mistakes. I have never said we don't make mistakes. Please show me somebody in journalism who will say we never make mistakes. The difference is that we acknowledge them. The difference is that we have a guideline of 24 hours. If any of our bloggers makes a mistake, during which they have to correct it, otherwise their password is withdrawn. Just imagine how different life...
How many fact-checkers do you employ?
Oh, you know, we have the most amazing fact-checking system. It's called thousands and thousands of commenters who immediately spot any mistake. And also, we have editors.
Oh, so see, mistakes are okay. They're put out there, and then you rely on the public reading the material to write in and say that's just plain wrong.
I don't really know what world you live in. Do you think the stuff that I mentioned, the stories that I mentioned, did not appear in the New York Times? The stories that we're talking about, the Judy Miller stories, were they caught before they appeared?
The Judy Miller story, I'm not here to defend the New York Times, but the Judy Miller stories were based upon sources, upon
anonymous
quotes.
Sources.
Now, those sources may have been misleading her. It's not for me to say one way or the other. But the fact is, if you take anonymous sources and off-the-record briefings out of journalism, you are not going to have, for example, the exposure of Watergate.
First of all, I never said that we should not use anonymous sources. All I said that we have to be very careful not to be used by anonymous sources, the way the New York Times and the Washington Post and many other respectable mainstream media were in the lead up to the war and continue to be. And you cannot say anymore may have been, because it means you have not read the mea culpas of the New York Times themselves. There is no may here. There were no nuclear reactor programs in Iraq. There were no connections between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. And there is nothing more serious, nothing more tragic than a journalist letting down the public when it comes to the selling of a war. These are matters of life and death. Thousands of people have died because of that. And you are more upset because of Mayhill Fowler and citizen journalism than you are about what the mainstream media have done.
No, I'm thinking about officials listening to you and wondering whether in the future it's going to be possible to talk to a journalist in an off-the-record way about something they see in government that makes them deeply unhappy. We could cite Watergate, the Pentagon Papers. We could even cite CIA officials leaking information about the pressure put on them in the run-up to the recent Iraq war. These sorts of examples in journalism won't happen if everything has to be entirely transparent and in the open.
Well, you're just really distorting what I'm saying. I said nothing about everything having to be in the open. I said very clearly that both the event at the Obama fundraiser that Mayhill Fowler reported and the other event that she reported at a rope line where Bill Clinton had a meltdown were in the public and on the record, and neither the Clinton campaign nor the Obama campaign said they were not.
Of course, the vast majority of blogs on your site aren't about factual reporting at all. They're about opinion, aren't they? And they're about opinion, which is deeply... Blogs are opinion.
Yeah.
So the point is, you're creating a more and more opinionated, some would say toxic, political environment.
I would really urge you to read the Huffington Post and tell me what is toxic, because we are actually the first website that employs 30 comment moderators to actually stop comments, anonymous comments that appear everywhere on the internet that are vile and ad hominem from appearing on the Huffington Post. We have such a high premium on civil discourse that we have gone to that extent, not just to rely on technology, but on human moderation to prevent toxic comments from appearing. Our blogs are opinion. Yes, that's what they are. And our news are news. And this is the clear distinction we make. And we have reporters, and we have hired Tom Etzel from the Washington Post to mentor our reporters in the best traditions of journalism.
Do you have faith in your unerring ability to know where the truth lies?
I have faith in our unerring commitment to ferreting out the truth. And to
that's not quite what I asked
that
you,
is what that is
you
all
define the truth. You say mainstream media, maybe including the BBC, I don't know, is too locked into a journalism of on the one hand, on the other hand. You say, no, there are many times when one has to say, this is the truth.
Well, wouldn't you agree? Wouldn't you say that we know a lot of things, that we know the earth is not flat and that is the truth, that we know slavery is wrong and that is the truth, we know the Holocaust was real and that is the truth, we know global warming is real, and yet we've spent years in America debating whether global warming is the truth, and we had the media acting like Pontius Pilate and basically presenting on the one hand say, Al Gore or a scientist talking about the dangers of global warming. And on the other hand, Senator James Inhofe or Michael Crichton or some scientist in the pay of Exxon telling us that global warming is a fraud.
And we know the Iraq war has failed. Is that the truth? We know that Barack Obama is going to be better for America than John McCain. Is that the truth?
There is no question that Iraq has failed. Yes, I mean, that is
there is no
based
question,
on facts.
Isn't there? It is just the truth.
Well, if you look at the facts...
That's the issue of your journalism. You have to be absolutely 100% sure.
What is your evidence that the Iraq war has succeeded?
Well, I don't know if you read your own reporting. You carry the AP newswire, many other newswires reporting from Iraq. You've seen the way the situation is in Iraq over the last few months. And you've talked to Iraqis, as I've just talked to one of the ministers in the Iraqi government.
So you are one of the ministers of the puppet Iraqi government?
Is that the truth? It's a puppet government,
you think that the Iraqi government is not being influenced by Iran? The main danger for the West? You know, this is really what, for me, is simply regurgitating the conventional wisdom. And that is what we're trying to counter by what we're doing at the Huffington Post, by the Citizen Journalism Project, which is called Off the Bus deliberately, because on the bus are the people who go to Iraq and go to the Green Zone and talk to some puppet from the Iraqi government and come back and they talk as though they know what they're talking about. Malcolm Muggeridge called this the eyewitness fallacy. And if you go to Iraq and you actually go to the real dangerous places and you report back, as Michael Weir is doing on CNN, you'll get a very different picture than the picture we're getting from these official trips.
Do you think the mainstream media, particularly newspapers, are involved in a slow death?
No, actually, I don't. I don't think it's either or. I think that in the foreseeable future, while you and I and most people watching right now are going to be alive, we'll have both. We'll have newspapers and we'll have digital media. And what we're seeing is that the newspapers that will thrive are papers that will do a really good job with digital media. And the digital media that will thrive are the Huffington Post, for example, that embodies the best of traditional journalism, fact-checking, truth, and accountability.
And a determination, in your case, to see Barack Obama become the next president of the United States. You have been disappointed before in your life. You were a Republican for many years. You were married to a Republican congressman. You've completely switched your politics, partly because you were so profoundly disappointed with John McCain. Do you think you might end up being profoundly disappointed with Barack Obama?
Incidentally, my leaving the Republican Party had nothing to do with John McCain. I left in '96. I did not even begin covering John McCain seriously until 2000. So that has nothing to do with that. I left the Republican Party because of the change in my view on government.
Do you think it is possible that you may end up being disappointed with Barack Obama?
Absolutely. And if Barack Obama is the president of the United States, the job of the Huffington Post will be to hold him accountable and to hold his feet to the fire. There's no question about that. That's why I keep telling you we're not partisan. We are not part of the Obama campaign. We're not part of the DNC. We are independent. We just have reached the conclusion that Obama is better for America and better for the world than John McCain. And that's a decision that we absolutely believe in. But we are going to write whatever is the truth. And if that happens to be hurtful to Barack Obama, we'll have to live with that.
Arianna Huffington, thanks very much for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you.